the kind of the tools that they had to learn back in the days here. Here you got a site here. What interests me about the site is that it shows you like it's kind of a geographic overview of the world, and it asks you, what would you like to discover? Almost as if from that kind of godlike thing looking down, you can actually explain what's happening on the ground floor. Like the grandma looking at me, talking to my friends, and saying, oh, hangjongera. That's the interpretation. So perceived space is what I see. And you say, okay, there's people there, and this is why he says here, it's to tend to prove objectively a materiality, the physical presence of the being, material actions of acting. So really what you can see with your physical eye, for just first spatial knowledge. And then there's a whole bunch of them. These are sites that are all dealing with somehow trying to represent and trying to understand what's happening in the shape. A second space goes a little bit further. So do we understand first space, perceived space? I think it's relatively, we should have this because third space gets more complex, so we have to make sure we pick up the first ones. Second space, conceived space. Second space is the interpretive locale of the creative artist. Do you understand this word, interpretive locale? Second space, locale is the area, the local, where the interpretation took place. The interpretive locale of, for example, the creative artist and artful architect, visually or literally representing the world in the image of their subjective imaginaries. That's where the architects sit. Or the utopian urbanist, seeking social and spatial justice through the application of better ideas, good intentions, and improved social learning. Or the philosophical geographer, contemplating the world through the visionary power of scientific epistemologies or the Kantian vision of geography as a way of thinking of more imaginative poetics of space. The spatial semiologist, the design theorist, etc., etc., etc. All of these people are dealing with this. The interpretive locale. It's where we are conceiving. It's where we, first having perceived, we look, we make conclusion, we say, okay, so someone says, make a school, okay, I'm going to conceive a school. It's where we as architects, urbanists, geographers, whatever you think, are conceiving our ideas. We're interpreting our ideas, our imaginations, for whatever reason, social justice, equity, what have you, where we're conceiving and constructing the world. The world of conceiving is sitting in that second space. Spaces of representation embody complex symbolisms, sometimes coded, sometimes not. They are, so I'll go on. They are linked to the clandestine underground side of social life. The partial unknowability, the mystery, and secretness. These lived spaces, representation, are the terrain for the generative of counter spaces, space of resistance to the dominant order, arising precisely from the subordinate, peripheral, or marginalized positioning. So we're moving now here, because these were also called spaces of representation. The reason why we use this terminology now is because conceived space is representational space. Because here I am as a person who designs something, and I'm representing something. I have a concept, it needs to be a school, it needs to be a square, it needs to be something. So I'm going to represent that space in my design, in my drawing, it's going to become manifested. This is representational space. But now we're jumping now to nothing, to something new, which is called spaces of representation. And space of representation here is this, it's far more complex because it's me in that space, on that sidewalk, representing myself. And where I'm in dialogue. And it's like, it goes complex symbolisms, sometimes coded, sometimes not, where people kind of handshake themselves or greet themselves or hanging together for some reason or not. For all of these codes here that we have no idea about because we're not part of that public. We're part from another public. They are linked to the clandestine grounds on the right side of social life. So how we're living, how our everydayness, the non-knowability, the mysteries, all these kind of things that are just there, constantly happening, that aren't either simply cleared, that fit into one box of how we perceive the action how one should be, or the design that we make, but it's coming back.
Yeah.
Spaces of representation teem with symbols. They're not merely symbolic spaces, they're spaces also vitally filled with politics and ideology, with the real and the imagined intertwined, and with the capitalism, racism, patriarchy, and other material spaces practices that concretize social relationships of production, reproduction, exploitation, domination, and subjection. They are dominated spaces, the spaces of the peripheries, the margins, and the marginalized. Also refers to the third worlds that can be found at all scales, in the corporeality, in the beauty of mind, in sexuality, in subjectivity, in individual and collective identities. Why does he talk here about spaces that on the one hand seem to be kind of these third world spaces? What do you see in these spaces of representation, and why does he try to connect space of representation to these kind of third world spaces? Can you imagine could be a reason for that?
Because we see them as a third world, and they probably see themselves just as normal.
Okay, good. But in this case, he's using it symbolically. So he says here, they are the dominated spaces, the spaces of the peripheries, the margins, and the marginalized. So the areas where activity and exchanges between people from all these aspects are taking place that are not necessarily fitting one-to-one with how I imagine the school to be, how I design the school to be, and how the action in that school is going to be taking place. Because I can tell you this, that the person who designed this space, and who designed the chairs and the tables that we're sitting on now, didn't imagine that Laura would be sitting like that. Because that's not the way it's supposed to be done. You see? This is your moment of representation. Here's where you're saying, this is how I represent. And when I came in and Arwen was sitting on the yellow chair, I said, this is what I represent. You're representing yourself constantly by the way you were engaging in space. Whether you're sitting kind of like very uptight in this, whether you're sitting very, laid back, whether you're kind of using the chair as a table, or as a footstand, or whether I'm putting my, this changing the table, this is a chair. I mean, conceive, chair. Chair, not table. This doesn't happen, but it's happening. Right here, right now. Imagine this moment, now imagine the whole city. And every single individual, and every single space there. All these things happening. It's always happening. The conceived is constantly being reinterpreted. So the designer, artist, architect, urbanist, he's already the translator of the first phase. Saying the perception, I see the city, or I see what is there, the physical reality, the borders, the very practical, not the fluid, not the movement, just, and I'm going to design. So I'm already interpreting that from me, a design, chair, school, building, courtyard, whatever, should be like this. And then comes the third person going, hey, I'm living here, or I'm here. And because I'm alive at this moment, I'm doing this. And at this moment, you're doing this.
So it's the user actually who is representing
The user.
everything.
The one who,
Yeah.
who makes it come alive. What is this room here with us not here?
It's not. It's an empty space.
It's a non-space. It's like this thing they talk, if an apple falls in a forest, or a tree falls in a forest, and no one hears it, does it really fall? Or does it really make a sound? Someone says. You don't know. It's supposed to make a sound, but you don't know it's going to make a sound. So this is us right now in this space, living this space and using it the way we want. Now the question is, when we leave here, so before we were not here, the space didn't exist. It became present in your world the moment that boy sent out the mail saying we're going to have a lecture tomorrow in BG 350. Then already some kind of symbolic thing becomes part of your reality. And then the next phase, when you enter it, then it becomes part of your physical reality. And that moment you go, okay, so now I'm going to start making it the way I make it. I'm going to sit the way I am, I'm going to move where I am, I'm going to situated. Knowing that, of course, I'm here to school or to study, that's one of your programs, and we're not here to play football, otherwise we would have been doing other things. We're not here to have a party, otherwise we would have done all sorts of other things. But the point is, the action is there, but we're not all acting the way we're supposed to be acting according to that action. We're somehow interpreting it all still in individual ways, even though the collective thing is called school and teaching and lecture or whatever. So on every action is always the individual who's always going to give some kind of personal, this is how I do it. Now the question becomes interesting, is what happens when we leave here? What happens to the space once we leave here? Any ideas? What does this, I'll keep it as open as that.
It doesn't get represented.
It doesn't get represented.
Not directly.
Alright,
Yes.
okay.
It continues with the traces that we left it with.
If we leave traces.
Yeah.
So the
This is
moment
a
that we
trace.
leave here, that's a hardcore documentation. So it's always going to be digital, the space, this moment. But the question is, when we leave here, do we, leave it as how we're going to sitting now, or we're going to put it all neatly back? That's a physical thing for the next person. But what does the space become for you, as an individual, once you leave here?
It's lived.
Hmm?
A lived space.
Yeah, we're living it. But what is it? What are you going to be doing tonight at 6? Thinking about this space?
Probably not.
Disappears. Till maybe the next time it might come back. So it's not there or not there. It's fluid. Depends on what your attention and how that individual is aware and activating and using that space. Maybe you're going to talk about it to a friend tonight. Yeah, we had this lecture, this guy was pointing at us in this space. Suddenly it's become present again. Then it becomes absent again. Presence, absence, representation. That's all in this world of lived space. Representational space is alive, it speaks as an effective kernel or ego. Ego, bed, bedroom, dwelling, house, square, church. It embraces the loci and passion of action, of lived situation. This immediately implies time. Consequently, it may be qualified in various ways. It may be directional, situational, relational, because it's essentially qualitative, fluid, and magnetic. So what he's now going to say is that while we just finished trying to rethink how we can get a better understanding of our being by saying, hey, history, society, let me include space. Now I get a better understanding of, let's say, the being, the thing that I'm studying. Now, the trilex of spatiality also can now be included for us to get a better understanding, a richer understanding of that what we see, the perceived, documented, Cartesian, that what we make, that what is then translated by us and put into play. But then, more importantly, how it comes to getting lived. How it starts becoming actualized, how it starts becoming part of processes of everydayness. And that, one of the questions, I'm going to save you guys from asking questions, because I often would get this question at the end of the lecture, someone would say, okay, understand. So how do I design lived space?
You don't. It's the user.
User face.
Yeah.
You don't do anything on the
It's
user.
funny how the 3 urbanists directly said you don't. What do the architects think?
They think they are. They think they're doing it. At least they wish they hope they're doing it.
I mean, so here's the thing, what architects usually make spaces, so they're really interested in this, they love this part. Like, okay, fast, how do I make it? But the point is, you can't make it. Because it's not you doing the making. It's something else that's doing the making. But what you can do, and here's really the crux of the whole thing,
You can direct.
you can be aware and acknowledge that it's taking place. And if you start doing that, if you acknowledge that this reality exists, what does that do for this? What does that do for this? All of them get shifted because you've now included something. Exactly the same how space helps us understand society and history, understanding the living, the actuality, the actualization process. And he's saying, hey, we might not just simply go to a GIS site anymore and click in, what do I want to learn, and say, hey, well, that's what's happening. because we know that it actually might be missing out some richness. So we said, okay, hold on, there's something that I need to actually start to include. And why are we doing all this inclusion?